So before we jump in and talk about what technical debt is, or even therefore introduce myself or Jim, I thought we'd start this morning just asking a simple question of where do you think most of your technical debt lies? And technical debt may or may not be a new term you've heard. People have maybe preconceived notions, or they think they have it defined, and today we're going to spend some time defining it. But I just wanted to start out today laying a baseline to understand what you think technical debt is, or where your specific technical debt lies in your organization. Looks like most people believe their technical debt lies in software. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Johnson, also known as MJ. I am with American Digital, and my counterpart here, Jim Buttjer, and I will be talking about technical debt. So to give you an overview of what we'll be covering today, obviously we'll be introducing who we are if you don't know who American Digital is already, very briefly, just so you have a baseline of why we're talking about technical debt and why we think we're appropriate to be having this discussion. But more importantly, we'll be actually diving into what technical debt means, right? So defining it, how it affects your organization, things like navigating technical debt, how it can grow, and then even look at examples of how to address it with hopefully silver bullets. And then really the bulk of that today is going to be spent on having a conversation, open discussion around technical debt. So briefly, American Digital is a technology firm that plays in a number of different areas. As you can see up on the screen here, we are an advisory firm. We deal in enterprise infrastructure and wireless, as well as SAP and cloud solutions. So we run the gamut of a lot of IT structures, infrastructures, systems, softwares, and processes. So we understand a lot, we've seen a lot, and that's why we think we're qualified today to talk about things. As well as we kind of help our customers navigate that entire IT landscape and strategy. So as I introduced myself earlier, my name is Michael Johnson. I am the Director of SAP Solutions at American Digital. I spent the last 13 years in the SAP world, fully immersed in all different types of roles, from technical and functional leads to project management, executive leadership and strategy, doing things like road mapping, digital transformations, life cycle analysis, cost analysis, IT road mapping, as well as a number of SAP implementations. I've got 8 full-scale SAP implementations under my belt, 5 upgrades, so I've seen and done a lot. In addition to, probably in the triple digits at this point, the number of projects that I've been a part of, delivered, both large and small. My specialties really lie within the SAP space and everything that SAP touches, so things like CRMs, e-commerces, infrastructure, as well as a lot of IT organizational around the SAP landscape, so things like M&A activity, assessments, proof of concept, IT road mapping, and strategic initiatives. And then the bottom there is just a spattering of companies that I have worked with in the past. I will now hand it over to my counterpart, Jim.
Good morning, folks. My name is Jim Buttjer. I'm a Senior SAP Solutions Executive with American Digital. So I support our sales team and preparing for delivery as well. So I have a lot of implementation experience, from small projects to some of the largest divestitures around the world, and everything in between, it seems. So I'm sure there's a lot of SAP experience in the room, but this is not exclusively for SAP. It just happens to be a great vehicle to drive a lot of transformational change, both around the SAP software as well as an enterprise. So I think that gives us a great foundation to talk today. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I want to leave a lot of time for discussion at the end. So let's keep moving. So I just want to do a little setup here for change. And part of this is understanding the dynamics of change in the marketplace. And certainly data volume is growing for organizations. And as a result, inevitably you're going to come across, how do you process that data? How do you respond? How do you prepare to absorb even more data in order for the business to use it? So that's what this is talking about, all right? I think what you want to get out of this is that data volume is going up a lot. And at the bottom, you can see the conflicting and in working in parallel, user and customer expectations are expecting that data is available anywhere and everywhere the way that they want it. And data is becoming more available than ever. And we have the ability to make data available wherever it needs to be. with technology. And so the question is, how does your organization plan to make that available, or are you already doing some of that but need to be able to do more of it? And then how quickly can you respond when you want to do something, all right? And technical debt is one of those things that can be a challenge or an outright obstacle for you to be able to do what you need to do when you want to do it, the way that you want to do it. So just as a little bit of where are you at in the map of SAP if you happen to run SAP. So for those of you who do not, this is just in parallel, I'll say, with the on-premise systems in the past. SAP systems were largely on-premise, and as a result, you probably put yourself in the left-hand side of the map, maybe with an older version of SAP, but this really applies to everybody. So think about where you are in terms of your main vendors and their roadmaps and your roadmaps for where you want to get to software, hardware, capability-wise, and determine how much more you need to go in order to get there. Again, from an SAP perspective, this is about saying how much you use SAP technology to achieve some of these business outcomes and value from the various technologies available for transformational change, whether it's through automation with robotic process automation, whether it's through the foundational platform change to HANA and the database and data processing platform it provides, to all the other areas, right? So the idea is that if you can combine data with innovative solutions, you can unlock a lot of value. So I think this is an interesting stat that really just hit me square between the eyes. So the companies that respond, sense and respond, and are able to respond and then innovate to deliver exceptional customer experience. And if you're either a wholesaler or manufacturer, it's who's the customer of your customer, right? How does the public or the consumer deal with your product or service? Those leaders in delivering exceptional experience outperform their peers in the S&P by nearly 80%. I think that's just tremendously telling when it comes to companies that are on top of it and winning in the marketplace versus those that are experiencing a lot of challenges, right? So our goal is to share some topic here on technical debt and give you some understanding about how those challenges arise and then how to get past them. So what's the big question is, what is technical debt itself? I'm giving you this definition to be as straightforward and sensible as possible, okay? So I'm defining technical debt as the gap you have to cross, all right, or basically the debt to be settled first between where your cultures and systems are today and how much you have to do either one time or perhaps repeatedly to maintain, respond, innovate, and evolve to meet your business needs, okay? Let's think about that for a second. It's not so much that technical debt absolutely stops you from doing what you need to do, but while if it isn't expensive and frustrating and prohibitive, if you have to do it repeatedly every time you try to do something, that is certainly a gnawing debt that you'd love to get rid of. I'm sure you can probably think of a few. So we're going to go ahead and run another poll just for the moment. Do you feel like you have the knowledge and tools to solve technical debt today? Okay, 73% say you don't have the knowledge and tools to solve your technical debt today. That's reasonable. I would say I would agree with that number. I'm not surprised by it. All right, so let's cover briefly, how does it affect your organization? Well, certainly performance of the organization as a result of having any kind of significant technical debt, whether in one area or broadly distributed across the enterprise, affects both top and bottom line, right? Certainly it can allow you to, the absence thereof, allow you to lead and respond in the marketplace as you don't have that baggage holding you back. But certainly if you have a lot of it, or in the wrong places especially, it can certainly inhibit your ability to respond in the marketplace, and kind of keep up with your peers and competitors. And certainly it's the ability to effectively and rapidly innovate. If your project was supposed to be a year and $1 million, but because of technical debt, it takes you a year and a half and $3 million, because of technical debt, that's a significant penalty to pay and keep paying every time you try to do something innovative. And of course, at some point, People are attracted to, you know, the new and what's moving the company forward. And certainly if you're a laggard and stuck in, you know, the dinosaur ages, eventually it's going to affect your workforce. All right, so your ability to attract and motivate and retain your workforce is important. All right, for an illustration, I take all credit and blame for this one, but I think it helps illustrate the point, right? So on the top, you see the debt that you can see, all right? And this is general categorizations here, folks. Down at the bottom below the water level there is debt you can't easily see, right? But if you sailed enough ships and you've had enough, you know, seafaring accidents, you tend to understand that there are things below the water you can't see, and you've probably run into a handful of them, right? Like chronic change, legacy integration issues, right? Or change in the market conditions, hello COVID. These are the types of things you can't really see, in addition to the things you can see above, right? There are ways to get rid of technical debt, and we'll talk about those a little bit later here. There's certainly ways to use lots of money. Unfortunately, you can bring in an icebreaker to bring it to take yourself, you know, through, or you know, roughly chip off a piece of that iceberg in front of you, and to potentially get through whatever ice is in front of you. But at the end of the day, that's a really expensive way to, and slow way to go about getting through where you need to go and going through those obstacles. It'd just be better if those obstacles weren't there, or something much easier to deal with, right? So in an untypical fashion, I'm actually going to put kind of a line in the sand here to give you a sense of the order of magnitude of scale of technical debt. All right, this is not from any particular, you know, authoritative source. I'm giving you our experiential kind of boundaries, orders of magnitude here. Right. So on the low end, if you can fix a technical debt issue in, say, you know, anywhere from a few days to, say, less than 2 months on average, you can do that with a small amount of money. Let's say it's a few $1,000s to, say, maybe a couple tens of thousands, and do it at a managerial level. That's probably a low level of technical debt. On the flip side, if your technical debt is something that has been, you know, probably accumulating for years, and it could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years and require board level consideration for where to spend that large amount of money, you probably have a high level of technical debt, right? All right. So I think this is really one of the most fundamental things that we need to, that I want to communicate here about how technical debt grows, right? I'm going to do it somewhat from a software and infrastructure perspective, but if you take the same concept, you can see where it works, right? So at stage one, maybe you just went live and you've been patching, you've been you know, keeping your systems up to date, and as a result, if there's a change that's needed or you want to innovate, it really doesn't cost you much. Maybe you have to apply a small patch or something like that, but it's not a project, right? In SAP land, that would be like applying a note to fix a problem, right? It doesn't require a project, just a little bit of elbow grease and some changes to be promoted, and it's done. Now, you move into the stage two, and in an SAP world, the support packages, for instance, are released about every quarter or so, about 3 times a year for ECC. And as a result, if you're getting into stage two, you probably already have a process for applying support packages and keeping things relatively up to date. And that cost is, you know, should be factored into how you do ongoing maintenance. The problem becomes and starts getting more serious once you get into stage three, where you're no longer keeping up with support packages. As a result, you're getting less willingness and cooperation from your vendors to either provide fixes or take them from a higher level for a problem that's already been fixed, or functionality that they're saying, well, you need to be at this higher level in order to use that, and then, you know, call us back when you're there. And as a result, the time and the cost for solving that technical debt at stage three starts rising considerably, right? And in an extreme case, let's get into stage four, you have systems that perhaps are, you know, many years out of date, hardware that's not supported, business processes that are long since archaic, and you know, people are potentially even deciding to leave because they're not going anywhere, and they equate their career with the ability to work with, somewhat modern and systems, right? And it may be just frustrating to work. So your time, complexity, and cost, and risk for that matter, are very high in order to solve the technical debt. One example there is it was a pilot implementation, and there's support packages had not been done for about 5 years or so. They're trying to implement some newer, better functionality that would allow a business process to happen in one step instead of 3, but it required integration with that much older system. And as a result, after a couple of months and time spent, SAP just said, look, you need to be at a higher level. We're not going to, bring this down. It's just too much. So as a result, they couldn't take advantage of newer functionality that was more efficient and modern, and we had to change design again to go back and use the old way that's been around for 10 years. Right? And that was just one example in a big project. So as an example here, we're going to say it's been 15, 20 years since you implemented. Maybe you did support backs for 10 years. You're on old hardware. The vendor doesn't make that model anymore. You probably can't get parts. Software is out of date. People don't remember how to make changes or to apply software changes and how to run that type of project. As a result, the executives have kicked that can down the road and left it for their successor. They've gone on to something more interesting and transformational. And as a result, in order to fix that problem, it does require some political capital and a budget to prioritize getting rid of that massive amount of technical debt, right? So often when you look below the typical options considered, they think, well, we have all this customization, everything's on maintenance. How do we go forward? And maybe they're kind of throwing their hands up, and so maybe we should just try to re-implement SAP or whatever the package is and just migrate our data. That's an expensive and time-consuming way to do it, to try to make up for years of lack of maintenance and trying to keep your technical debt low. Now, there are some creative options, and this is where I want to take this, is that sometimes it is possible to say, hold on a second, it's not that bad. I mean, it's not good, but it's not that bad. There might be ways to bring that system or that environment around and still get you to where you want to go. Just let's have a conversation about it and see if we can find a way to maybe combine a few things, look at it differently, and find a path forward. So you might be guessing that I was leading up to this, and you'd be absolutely right. Is it possible to eliminate multiple kinds of technical debt at the same time? The answer is yes, it is possible. We've done it, and it has varying degrees of possibility, right? But it really takes understanding the totality of it to see how much you can eliminate at the same time, and whether that means it's, going to be more expensive, more time-consuming, just need more resources, or more executive support, whatever the case is. Yes, it is possible, right? So my suggestion here is whether you work with a partner already or you are interested in working with us, it's really a combination of consulting. In this case, if you have SAP, as well as general IT and software and infrastructure expertise and implementation experience. I want to stress that is important, because no matter what it looks like on paper, implementation experience, there's no substitute for understanding how you can put those things together. And from concept to implementation to integration, the kinds of testing that you should be doing, depending upon the technical debt being resolved and whether or not you're introducing any other changes that are kind of go forward, I'll say, in order to come up with the right deployment strategy and show effectiveness in getting rid of that technical debt. So I just want to mention the second bullet there, that even though we talk about technology, yes, we're also financially savvy. And there are ways to help you. For instance, if you already spent or allocated your budget for this year, we still need to get things done. We do have ways to help you defer payments, reduce your costs, maybe even free up some cash, and help you decide whether or not something you might otherwise consider to be capital might be able to be categorized as, say, ongoing expense, or vice versa, right? Whatever makes sense for your organization. So as an example here, you can certainly read all this, but the first example I want to share about how do you solve debt, right? Technical debt. sometimes it's not so much having to purchase a piece of software, but it's really about how do you go about implementing that, say, new technology. In this case, by the way that we work together, we were able to help a client go from an old enterprise storage system to a new enterprise storage system from the same vendor, but their old one was out of lease, and as a result, they were paying a premium of about $250,000 a month until they could fully release, get all of the old systems off of, or all the current systems, I should say, off of the old platform and migrate over to the new one. Well, unfortunately, IT was not communicating with the business and with production support, and they were just doing it. Fortunately, we had set up an environment management council to communicate and coordinate between different groups and stakeholders who have different leaders and different budgets and different tools for managing change. And that helped us detect it, coordinate, and as a result, we were able to get them done with, get the enterprise storage system deployment done faster by 2 months, saving about $500,000, while also doing it in a safer manner, thus reducing risk by rolling it out to non-production systems first, doing testing, and then to production, while also keeping our $140 million or so SAP implementation on schedule. As another example where we're able to combine projects, a company talked to us about how to provide HA and DR, that's high availability and disaster recovery, for their enterprise software system. In this case, it happens in Microsoft Dynamics. Right? So they didn't have either one. It ran all of the retail stores as well as their loyalty program. So they thought they would need to do 3 projects to upgrade the OS, then the database, and then implement the always-on availability groups. By doing an assessment, and we were able to show them, look, you don't actually have to do 3 projects. We can combine this one to 1 project, save a lot of time, a lot of money, and do 1 round of testing. And as a result, we were able to show them a perfect cutover. No issues were raised during hypercare. They actually found some more opportunities to make some changes in their code, make it better. And as a result, they saved a lot of time and a lot of money, and they were super happy. And finally, coming to kind of a bigger, more complex, hairy scenario that might be more familiar to the SAP clients and customers out there. How do you take a very old SAP, say, on-premise system, and you're interested in moving to the cloud? It's one of the top requests we get these days. How do I also look at moving to HANA as well? Can I get rid of some of this older technical debt too that has been hanging around? Yes. Can I include an HA and DR solution? Yes. Can I get additional services provided and do that all at the same time? Yes. So just because it sounds difficult, especially for even people who do, kind of do and support SAP every day, but they're not necessarily in the business of, complex implementation strategy and design and large projects such as upgrades and implementations per se, or it's been a long time since the organization did that type of thing, right? Funny enough, a manufacturer who hasn't built a plant in 20 plus years, people aren't around to tell them how to build a plant anymore, right? So that's kind of where we are, where we know how to build the plant, and we've seen all kinds of different plants, large and small, and hanging on cliffs and so forth. And yes, it can be done. You can combine multiple technical debts together and get them done in much smaller amount of time, money, and risk than you might think. So after today's poll, are you feeling like you have more understanding and are better able to address technical debt? I'm not saying you think you can do it all by yourself, but do you feel better about it? All right, 85%. All right, 85% feel better equipped to solve technical debt. That's great. I think we're doing a good job of that. So we wanted to create a large time and dedicate this time as kind of a roundtable discussion. And we put this up here as a kind of a prompt for you to think about what kind of technical debt do you have you had, what do you see coming up that you'll need to address, and whether that's just a small itchy kind of thing, or it's a large and been looming, and everybody's been kind of waiting for that rainy day, and it might be that rainy day now. Think about that, and we obviously want this to be an open, fair discussion. You don't have to mention any names. You don't need to mention any project names or people's names per se. You can substitute to protect the name of the innocent. But really, we want this time to be available for you to bring it up, throw on the table, and have us address it, give you some ideas, and make some observations. What we've seen before, what you might think about your unique situation, and then for yourself, and perhaps for a follow-up conversation if you're interested, what kind of innovation projects do you think you might want to or need to implement soon that might also be an opportunity to get rid of some of your technical debt and pay that off?
Yeah, this is Matthew Miller.
Hey, Matt.
Hi. For my particular team, we're really looking at, we're currently going through an exercise, if you will, of really building out some objective key results, some OKRs, and we're trying to stretch ourselves to basically, build relevancy within the organization around technical debt, right? We have, I think we have an innovative culture. There's people that are thinking about it, but how they connect that, to technology is really on us as IT folks, and that's what we're finding, right? No one's talking about technical debt because they don't necessarily find that relevant, in terms of what they're doing, even though those threads are starting to cross. So, for us, I think, we're hoping to kind of, like you said, innovative projects. Well, maybe we're doing a little higher level than that. Obviously, we got to go through budget management and so forth. But, the idea is really, I think, for us, the strategy, or for me, is to, stretch our business thinking, think about those longer term goals, bigger things we want to do, technical, technology disruptors, so on and so forth, and bring those front and center. And we can kind of talk to about sets the table for talking about technical debt and why resiliency is important. And that's just a challenge, and I think that's really where the difficulty is how do we get, you can talk to people about technical debt all day, but let's face it, they want to talk about their vision, where they want to go, not about things dragging them down. And that's the goal. That's the trick. I've yet to tackle.
and I want to make sure that everyone understands this, because this is sometimes difficult for technical folks who think and breathe, software and hardware and IT all day, is that technical debt can also be in how your budgets get allocated. As an example, I don't know if they're attending at the moment, but I saw a great move forward to address technical debt in a large organization, where they said, you know what, this technical debt is not going to get addressed until we put a name and a face and a budget line to it. So when they put out their annual budget planning call for projects the next year, they said, what are your capital or strategic projects, and then what technical debt? They actually put a category in there for technical debt. What is it you want to solve? And so that we can put some money towards that, right? So even if it's not part of, say, a strategic program, or the CEO's plan, or digital transformation, if there's something that can help smooth things out and not be an obstacle constantly for your organization to move forward and do what it needs to do, whether small or large, put it in a technical debt category or whatever internally you call it, but give it a name, give it a place, and a reason to be discussed, right? So if you never ask for that budget, you're not going to get it.
Yeah, Jim, to piggyback onto that, and Matthew, to highlight what you were saying, everyone wants to talk about new technologies and innovation, right? But it's not sexy to talk about what's holding you back. And so to Jim's point, putting a dollar value on that and making people understand where money, resource, time is being allocated that could potentially be freed up to then innovate and talk about the fun new technologies is something that really drives home, especially from a leadership perspective. When you start showing those bottom line numbers to, the board, the C-suites, they'll start paying attention.
I'll give you an example, Matthew. It's just really simple observation made with another webinar with a family member's company. They wanted to make their field service technicians a little more productive, right? They had a kind of a manual process. They didn't have information in hand. They put a mobile app in their hand, so when they're out visiting clients, they're able to look up products that they have both on their truck and available in SAP for order, And in this case, they made it in a Fiori-based app, so whether on a phone or an iPad, they could access it either way. And instead of then spending another half an hour to an hour at the end of the day, catching up all the notes from the work that they had done that day, they could do it right there in a process-driven, friendly, click, click, click 90% of the time, and be done much faster with their work, give them an opportunity to have sales-related conversations with their customers, and save them anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes a day. Just 5 minutes a day, okay, against 800 technicians doing this every day, saved well over $1 million in the first year, all right? And that's just on the cost saving and productivity side. It's not even to talk about what kind of sales were enabled and customer satisfaction and promoter scores you might have gotten out of that.
Yeah, and making those compelling cases, that's kind of where the challenge is. And we a little background, we have a lot of technical debt. So, and the company's really, I think, in a sense, they're surviving well with it, like in the sense that they have a lot of it. So, it's the day-to-day. They don't want to upset that or tip over the apple cart in terms of, all of a sudden implementing a new ERP across the organization. I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 16 ERPs. So,
Okay.
their thought process around that is, they're even where they want to consolidate is decided on. Like they make a decision. It's not going to be an ERP consolidation. We're just going to do financials or some particular aspect. So they pick and choose. And not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's just that it moves our stakes into that cost alone doesn't make a lot of compelling case unless the organization is suddenly really doing that homework and pointing that out to them. I don't use their ERPs, right? So I can't speak to cost of time, and that would really be on all these disparate site groups that would have to come up with that case, which is very difficult for them because they're not necessarily a shared service. They're in their own pocket of management, so it makes it very challenging to try to do it from that angle. So for us, it's more of we have a forward-looking organization, so we got to kind of look at it as trying to take advantage of that and tying that back to what could be possible or where they're going to end up encountering roadblocks when they get to a certain point in their vision.
Yep. Unfortunately, one of those first obstacles could very well be the mindset of the decision makers and even the influencers, right?
Yeah.
Of who is open to change and do they understand and want to react or even take initiative in the marketplace. And sometimes that initiative is really beaten out of people until the point where they're like, I was hired to do this transformational type job and put things forward, and I'm not getting the opportunity to do that. So I'm just going to go find, someone else that is willing to do that. Good example, Matthew.
So one of the points I wanted to bring up with technical debt, I think immediately a lot of people think technical debt, they think of software, they think of infrastructure, but technical debt could be in skill sets too in people. And one of the examples that I wanted to just share was, we talk a lot about SAP today, right? So this is a prime example. I was recently talking to a customer running SAP's ECC, and they have an older work staff, and they were looking at, most of the people had been around in their IT and on their business analyst side for, with the company for 15, 20 years. And they were toying with the idea of S/4HANA. And from a business disruption perspective, they didn't like the idea, right? There was a lot of changes that has to happen. They have to get approvals for large budgets. They weren't necessarily sure if they wanted to go through the process of another implementation or large migration project. They were very comfortable in their steady state. But one of the driving factors for keeping S/4HANA on the table is just their employees and their ability to attract good talent going forward in the future, right? They were thinking 3 to 5 years down the road when, they may or may not be moving to a new ERP system. How are they going to attract young new talent to be able to support the system, right? They don't necessarily have a very diverse location, like a large city where they could attract talent easily or have access to a large talent pool. So that was a very big key factor that they were thinking about that I think a lot of people forget when they come to technical debt.
Absolutely. It's kind of like, how many COBOL programmers could you find if you really needed one? If you're still running on COBOL. Well, SAP, 3 or 4 versions ago, that's hard to find those skill sets who have not worked on the newer systems and are somewhat constrained even by, well, this is how it's been done for the last 20 years, and I can tell you how the last 2 or 3 versions did it. I'm not sure how I'd put together a better business process or fix a problem in a system that's 4 versions back, without knowing what tools and options I have in the future. That's just tough.
Has anyone else seen or considered that? I mean, going forward, and obviously SAP was an example of use, but it could be any technology, right? As Jim just mentioned, right? COBOL or some other programming languages, or even maintaining old SQL. Like there's a lot newer technology. A lot of the younger talent are coming up with proficiency in things like Java and other programming languages that maybe your company is not leveraging, or maybe you're not supporting it as heavily.
Well, thanks for hosting this. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I think some of the experiences that we've had as far as technical debt with our organization, it's kind of a little bit of a blessing and a curse element to it, where it's the infrastructure group, which was a large part of driving so many of our application admins and owners. Our organization's just going through a bit of a transformation of getting like a platform team or an application house team established and a data team established and all that. And so it's just taking us a noticeable amount of time to get people equipped, empowered, and the ability to really manage applications. Now, at the same time, we have very skilled individuals in our infrastructure tier 3 group that they've had a lot of tenure, they've seen a lot of things, they've seen a lot of transformation within the organization of seeing apps, either some come and gone or some that have stuck around for probably a little too long than needed. And so you got a lot of that kind of legacy stuff going on there, and creating that kind of disparity of systems that exist from a software layer to a hardware layer and everything in between. And so these are really helpful things to kind of chew on a little bit for our group, because we do notice that, yeah, technical debt is a reality, and that, modern apps are starting to really do a better job of replacing, 2 or 3 tool sets we have in-house, but it is kind of driving that conversation forward with, more people, more folks that are involved in making the decisions, and product owners and managers of where we should be placing appropriate tool sets. And of course, COVID's definitely emphasized a huge cost element now going forward. I think it's definitely a reoccurring enterprise discussion that is healthy. It's just, getting through some of those potential roadblocks with various, leadership and focus and priorities, and actually making forward progress or moving the needle, if you will, on certain tasks. So yeah, I think this is definitely an ongoing discussion that many organizations have, and it's healthy to have, and it's good to keep yourself in check on how you can get through it. So I just wanted to add kind of that nugget as people were thinking about how to relate to technical debt in their scenario.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned data, because it's something that is often underrated when you talk to IT folks, and especially in the SAP world. Technical folks tend to not give data its due, but when it comes to ERP or any kind of integrated process, and SAP is certainly particular about this, SAP lives and dies on good data that's according to standards, right? So if you're, say, believe it or not, there's still some companies out there, I find this a lot in manufacturing, where they had separate systems for sales processing, separate systems for finance, separate systems for manufacturing. And as a result, when SAP or any ERP comes along, or for that matter, they just want to do some type of process integration, right? Maybe you link sales to manufacturing, right? If they haven't addressed data standards and how they're all going to speak the same language, ERP just chokes. It just does not work. Right? And as a result, that's another kind of insidious form of technical debt that often doesn't get addressed until late in implementations. If you want a kind of a best practice I could share here, the customers who are really proactive about doing data projects as a precursor to ERP projects have the highest success rate. They go out, they profile their data, they already know some of the main problems they have. They come up with the data standard. They know what needs to be cleansed. They know how they're going to either do it one time or, if the necessary, provide for ongoing conversion from one part of the business to another or from one process to another. But they're trying to come up with that way to go forward on a permanent basis. Now, I speak that word on purpose because here's another little tool for you, and this is kind of a double-edged sword. On an original implementation, somebody came up with a temporary solution. And that's one of the dangers that can come up in an implementation where you're trying to come up with a long-term vision for how things should be done, right? And so the phrase we came up with, there's nothing so permanent as a temporary solution, right? That patch or that thing that's hanging off the cabinet is somehow providing the power to the something, and it's been that way for 7 years. That's not supposed to be the way that it's done, but it's been working, right? Well, in the same way, from a technical debt perspective, you might come up with, take that same concept and apply it in this way. Nothing so permanent as a temporary solution. So how could I get one thing in and incept it to show that it works, and even on a limited basis, just kind of find a way to leave it in there? Because once people start depending on it, they'll want to reinforce and make sure it keeps working, right? And then you usually will get the budget to make it better, scale it out, formalize it, operationalize it, and so forth.
Yeah, David, one of the things that you hit on that I think is relevant, obviously now with COVID, to bring up is, we're all being asked to do more with maybe less, or at least look at budgets and figure out where we can be more efficient at things. The simplest place, or the first place I tell people to look at technical debt. That is something that's, you're putting money into, you're spending, and it's not helping you in any way. It's probably more often than not dragging you back or holding you back. So it's not fun. It's not necessarily, a big bang project that's going to get a lot of notoriety, but it's definitely going to save on the bottom line, clean up your system, and basically position you better for the future to make strategic initiatives and new technology purchases, or new hiring or directives, or whatever that may be. So that's obviously a big line item to be looking at now in the current environment.
Thanks, David.
Yep, thank you.
So we've got a few more minutes here. I'll leave the floor open if anyone has any other questions or wants to bring anything up.
I heard someone speaking at the same time as David. I think that was Rich.
That was Rich. You got it right, Jim. So I have a couple comments for you. One, when you think about, and you kind of touched on some of this and everything, but I'll just kind of reiterate it in my own way. One, when you talk about infrastructure and technical debt, right? The old saying, software eventually works, hardware eventually fails. Get your hardware cleaned up, it's going to fail on you. So you got to remember that. When you just talked about data just now for a moment, obviously you were talking about cleansing it and getting it right and keeping it right and everything, and that's important. I didn't hear you say, you may have, but I might have missed it, was also around getting rid of the old data, because as you move on, you need to purge the old stuff and get rid of it, because all it does is create another technical debt around performance, around storage, around backup, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it begins to cost more and more and more as you retain data that's, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15 years old, right? So you want to get rid of that old data that you no longer need. It does have big performance issues, especially in SAP, which we're dealing with today.
Absolutely.
And then one more comment I'll make. You mentioned it in the presentation around people and the technical debt around people. And heroes. We all love our heroes, right? We all have them, we love them, and then until we don't, and I'll give you an example from a previous life that I had, which I had a hero working on an application. The application, he was pretty focused on that one application, and basically said, yeah, I'm going to support this application because you can't get rid of it because it's very important and everything to the business. And basically felt like I had, my hands tied behind my back. And if those of you that know me know I don't like that feeling. So I just started investigating and figuring out what was being done and what needed to be done there. And I figured out that, he's probably doing about 2 days of work a month for that. And because he thought he had, had me in a corner. So I fired him and, and solved the problem a different way with other resources. And it took him about a week to figure out, how to do that 2 days of work a month. So heroes, we love them, but we got to understand their value and appropriately take care of them, and don't create a lot of technical debt around them as well. That's just one example, but hero culture is not a good culture. You got to build the processes around it and move forward, because they can hold you back to technologies that you do not want to be in. And we replace that technology within a year. So you don't want to be in that situation.
Absolutely. So thanks for the archiving prompt. There's always multiple things that we'd love to share on time. So I just want to come back to that, reinforce that yes, archiving is a serious thing that you can do. Unfortunately, the mindset that I've seen over the years is archiving, we're not ready for that. We don't know how it works. We know we probably should do it, but we're not really sure what it gives us other than just less data. Well, think about it. Every time you take a backup of a system, you're backing up the entire database in most cases, right? And as a result, every gig and every backup times the number of backups goes into storage. You might even make another copy of it, let alone say copy it to a QA system. So when you accumulate data over years and years, you get into the terabytes. Every time you do any kind of significant data conversion or an implementation or a migration, anytime that data and the size of that data, it comes into a factor, that may kick you out of the window from, say, I can get it done in a 24 or 40-hour window, and now you just can't do that type of project unless the business wants to sacrifice, say, another day or two because of just the size of the database or the data set that needs to be converted or processed or migrated, right? And as a result, what you could have done had a data been archived and do so in a standard business window for an unusual activity like this, you just can't do, right? But if you had archived and dropped that system down from 16, 20 terabytes to 5 or 6 or even 10, and whatever makes sense for the organization, you want to keep 7 years of data, 10 years of data, or 3 years of data except for these types of objects, and maybe you move that off to a document management system or an archive system that allows for that query and retrieval long term at a lower cost. You can move that data out of your primary system, get a lot more efficiencies, and your users are going to love it too. Right? You're going to see the difference between batch jobs running a lot faster, users being able to see only the current data, right?
Yeah, and that's actually the point that I've been stressing. We've actually purged terabytes out of our main SAP database, ECC database, and billions of records, and they're seeing performance gains from doing that. So after we don't run reorgs on the tables. So
archiving pays a lot of happy dividends. Unfortunately, it's just something that's gotten kind of a bad name because it's kind of ho-hum boring over the years. Nobody thinks and wakes up, springs up in the morning and says, I want to do archiving. I don't think I've ever seen it. Even people who do it, don't spring up and say, I want to do archiving this morning. But it is something that pays big dividends.
So we're very near the time frame here. We had a question in the chat, maybe we can address in about 30 seconds about speaking to technical debt that's created with emerging technologies and what that means when companies are always trying to keep up with the next technology solution.
Yeah,
that's a great question. Thank you.
So the next technology solution is it for your particular use case? I would ask that first, as opposed to saying, well, we got to integrate with social media. Maybe no, you don't. But it could be a good idea. Certainly in the case of, say, SAP, they're doing what's called experience management. And so the ability to pull in and analyze large sets of social media data, for example, about their experience, whether that's from surveys, it's doing sentiment analysis on Twitter and so forth. You can pull that in and you can tie that into your customer service and your marketing campaigns and sales, but it's got to have a purpose, right? Just so I don't want people to think, and unfortunately we do see this, that if the Joneses are doing it, then we need to do it too. Not the case. Or you don't need to do it in the same way and in the same scale as they do. Maybe you have a much more specific use case and as a result, much more reasonable approach and solution scale that trying to keep up with the next technology solution can afford you.
As Jim mentioned at the beginning of this call, this will be available for on demand if you want to consume any of the content at a later point. And obviously, if you have any questions, you want to have any follow-up conversations or anything like that, Jim and I are available. We'll make our contact information available for everyone to see as well. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.